Hi, sorry I made you all wait an extra week. A lot happened since I posted the last video. I fell into a depressive episode, and then I had a gender crisis, and then the Wi-Fi stopped working because the cables for the router had degraded, and then I had another gender crisis, and then Binary and I started hyper-focusing on the actual outline for Shattered Souls and finished it, and then I had to redesign my Sona, and I'm currently working on the stills for him, and it's been a whole situation. Anyway, this is part 2 of a series of videos where I redesigned the cast of the Creepy Crew to fit Shattered Souls, as well as design new characters for the cast. Today we're focusing on Zalgo's Proxies. I've already drawn Slenderman's Proxies, the link to that video will be in the description. I'm not gonna ramble like I did last time because I don't have as much to explain. Here goes. Yes, Robster, the character that made about half the viewers realize they liked girls. What can I say about her? Well, for one thing, I have actually redesigned her multiple times in the past, but I was never really satisfied with how she ended up looking. Binary helped me a lot with this iteration, like she did with the last one, and I have to say I think this is a marked improvement over my previous attempts. She may look like a full adult here, but make no mistake, she and Lady are the same age, both chronologically and in terms of emotional development. See, when Robster separated herself from Lady, something I don't consider a spoiler given it was in the original, I like to think she wasn't too keen on having the body of a young girl since it meant she wouldn't be taken as seriously, and used her powers to make herself look older and thus more respectable. In short, this form is what a then 12-year-old Robster thought a cool, attractive adult looked like. Her coloring is nearly identical to Lady's with the exception of a ring of gold in her eyes. This is for world-building reasons having to do with demon classification and her kinda sorta mother/soul donor. She has slit pupils for the same reason. Her facial structure is also functionally identical with the exception of pointed ears and markings under her eyes that Lady doesn't have, but the rest of her body isn't. She's noticeably taller than Lady even without high heels, and her body type is more stereotypically feminine. Again, this was a preteen's idea of an adult woman, and she hasn't changed it since. We decided it would be fun to make it so that Robster's preferred style of dress is more outwardly feminine to contrast Lady, who is more androgynous and/or masculine in her preferred style. So her main outfit consists of a purple sleeveless dress with a white collar, a corset, tights, black high-heeled boots, and matching elbow-length gloves, and she has longer hair. Of course, some elements of her old design did make it in as well, such as her gloves being fingerless in reference to her design in later installments of the original comic, and the fact that she wears dramatic makeup, in this case, dark purple eyeshadow and black and white lipstick. As an aside, her hair is meant to resemble a flower that Binary and I made up for the sake of the setting, a type of peony known as a glaufatus. It's kind of like the magical version of a sunflower. You'll see what that means and why she's associated with them later on.
And there we go! First redesign of the video is done! This honestly gives me the same feeling like I'm looking at two different people with the same vibes that the Lady one did. That said, I really like how she turned out. It gets the Dark Priestess vibe across really well. I've kept you all waiting long enough, so let's move on to the character I know you've all been waiting for.
Randy's a very interesting boy when it comes to the way I've drawn him in the past. My first attempt at redesigning him just entailed having him in his corpse form from the comic all the time, albeit with a kind of clunky but in my opinion pretty cool looking flower motif. Then a friend of mine on Instagram, Pacheta, got a hold of him and made some adjustments, and that was his official design for upwards of a year. Then my co-writer, Binary, gave him a complete redesign such that he was completely unrecognizable from the original, and then I managed to find my old screenshots and some re-uploaded videos and was like, wait, I actually don't hate his canon design. And now we're here. Basically, this isn't a full redesign, more applying some elements from old designs I used as well as a few headcanons Binary and I have. So while the majority of his design is still the same as his canon one, there are a few differences. We interpreted his body type, which was probably the results of Bitstrips being very weird about putting jackets on male characters, as him being kind of broad-shouldered and muscly for his age, but still having some of his baby fat, and we gave him a rounder, younger-looking face. We also darkened his skin a little further, partially due to having specific headcanons about his ethnic background, which is to say, Mexican on his mother's side, and partially because color picking off the model without any modifications would have made him look like we gave him a bad spray tan. We also decided to make him more strongly resemble his father, or at least how I interpreted his father's design, mostly by giving him said father's thick eyebrows and prominent nose. We also gave him longer hair and changed its texture based on the fact that, from what I remember, his mother had really wavy hair, and his father had, I think, really curly hair, which means the kid's going to have a nigh untamable mane of fluff. As for his outfit, while most of it is the same as his canon one, we did swap out his black skinny jeans for a giant pair of cargo pants held in place with hunter's tape. My older design's flower motif got to stick around, albeit not as actual flowers on his face, but as scarring around one eye that strongly resembles marigold petals. You'll find out what happened to him later. Speaking of that eye, it's now solid black with no separation between the sclera, iris, and pupil because of Zalgo getting his hands on him and said eye being replaced with some sort of weird inky blood, ichor, whatever the term would be. The inside of his mouth is the same, save for his teeth. I know that he canonically used a pocket knife as a melee weapon, but come on, would this kid have the patience to use such a tiny weapon that requires that level of finesse to use effectively? No. No, he would not. So he gets a baseball bat now.
And that's Randy. It's kind of funny to me that he had one of the more drastic redesigns in the past, and now we've just kind of gone back to his old look. With some embellishments, of course.
Next up is Lost Silver, who I admit I kinda put off because I couldn't find the concept sketches Binary made, so I had to kinda go off of memory. This is mostly an adaptation of his canon design, which in this case means Ethan from Pokemon Gold and Silver, but desaturated and decidedly lacking in eyes and limbs. We did decide to go the desaturated route as opposed to just pure black and white, because pure black and white wouldn't have been as interesting. He got the squishy-faced little kid treatment that a lot of the younger characters did, so he's a little bit more, oh god, how do I say this without sounding offensive, stubby than his original design. I kinda wanted the empty sockets to almost look like stylized red eyes when I did full shading, since the idea of Lost Silver just staring through people seemed cool to me. He also constantly looks at least a little stressed. I like the idea that when he's really stressed, though, he kind of glitches, which is totally an intentional choice based on the lore, and totally not because I got some new brushes I wanted to show off. Absolutely not. No, sir. Again, this one was fairly simple, and I didn't have a lot to say. I do love this little weirdo, though, and I had a blast drawing him. Continuing the trend of small babies, we have Sally. Rather than following the original designs by La Mishimish 1-to-1, Binary and I decided to more closely base Sally's design on 1950s children's clothing, since I believe that was the approximate time period in which Sally died. So she gets a little collared shirt, knee-length skirt, and Mary Jane's. We kept her Bitstrips model's pigtails, but made them longer and more floaty. We also made her skin much paler and kind of ashy. Beyond that, there isn't actually that much to say. She has a very simple design, kind of like Lost Silver in that regard. And there we go. There's Sally. Isn't she just precious? But with that, we are done with the baby squad, and it's time to move on to the others. Oh ho ho, I have been looking forward to this. Partially because his new design is sick as hell, but also partially because we took the most uncomfortably straight character in the series and turned them into a gender-fluid disaster buy, and I think that's hilarious. Rather than just being a puppy boy, Sully is now a sort of artificial chimera. In essence, their body has a human base with a bunch of monster genetics thrown in, resulting in her being an overly hybridized genetic monstrosity. There's a reason for that, but that reason's a big spoiler, so I can't say what it is yet. This results in them having some unusual physical traits, such as her mouth being full of sharp teeth and her pupils becoming blown out and mismatched as a stress response. In general, their build, coloring, and facial structure are near identical to Lou's, albeit Sully is a bit shorter and has a thinner build. Their hair is messy like their 2015 counterpart, but it's much longer and darker. He has significantly less scarring than either of his brothers, but does have half of a Glasgow grin to match Toulouse for reasons that I cannot get into because they're also spoilers. All I can really say is that their mental state is kind of fragile. Sully's main outfit is heavily based on grunge fashion, with some elements from the metal core aesthetic. A lot of her body is covered in bandages, and she wears a surgical mask that covers her scarring, which incidentally is intended to resemble a dog's muzzle as a callback to Sully canonically being a puppy boy, which, yes, I'm going to keep harping on that. The rest of his outfit consists of a black tank top, oversized flannel shirt, work boots, and straight-cut jeans. Oh my god, I've been referring to Sully with different pronouns every other sentence. That was not intentional. I must have been pretty tired when I was writing the script. But you know what? I think they'd approve. Or at least they'd find it funny.
And here we go. There's Sully. I don't have a lot to say here, except that I'm super happy with this design. They're so scrungly. I love that for them.
Up next is Dunklunk. Sorry, I've been calling him that as an inside joke with Binary, and I think it stuck. Anyway, he has an established canon design outside of the webcomic, being a Nintendo character and all, so it was more a matter of picking a design for him that I liked and interpreting it as best I could, a lot like some of the others here. And there were a surprising amount of options. Link's shadow from the old Famicom games, the kinda incorporeal Dark Link from Ocarina of Time, the many Shadow Links from the Toon Timeline games, the various cosmetic skins from some of the newer ones, and whatever the hell's going on in the manga. I ended up going with the Dark Series cosmetic armor from Breath of the Wild since it's generally accepted as the canon Dark Link design. I did the best I could to get the colors right, but color picking off of 3D models is hard sometimes. I did add a few touches of my own, like removing the hat like I did with Ben and making the inside of his mouth a glowy blue void, but beyond that, this is basically just a faithful adaptation. Since I don't have a lot to say about his design, I'll just talk about his personality in Shattered Souls. Binary Dye wrote Dark Link as a sort of blend of the Chunibyo archetype in some anime and Adam from Has Been Hotel, which is to say he's an unpleasant blowhard with delusions of grandeur. In general, I like the idea that he's so annoying that the only reason he's shown any respect is because he's actually good at his job. He still has beef with Ben despite some changes to both their backstories, it's just that in this case it's kind of ridiculous and I'm not sure how to explain it without spoiling part of the later episodes/chapters. And there we go. I love how smug he ended up looking. He's such a little asshole and I love him. Observer's design is very simple, but I wanted it to more closely tie into the lore of the character, at least according to the Tribe 12 wiki and TV tropes. While they're still a flat silhouette with glowing eyes, they're meant to more closely resemble their vessel in Tribe 12, Kevin. That is to say, they have Kevin's textured hair and glasses. I also gave them a near-permanent, unsettling, glowy smile. I like to think you can always see the outline of their mouth even when it's closed, but I ended up not putting that on the ref sheet for reasons that I still don't fathom. And that's Observer. Their design didn't take me that long at all, which is honestly kind of funny since most of the others were upwards of an hour. Eyeless Jack's design was basically all Binary's doing. He was her favorite growing up. Our old friend group from middle school all had nicknames based on creepypasta, and while mine was Ben, which would turn out to be a sign of things to come, Binary's was Eyeless Jack. We wanted his color palette to be very limited, mostly consisting of shades of gray with a few pops of blue and purple. The majority of his body is covered up, with a lot of pockets on his clothes for his supplies. However, when his face is uncovered, we can see that he has grayish-purple skin with markings resembling the goop coming from his eye sockets. He also has 3 horns on one side of his head since his summoning was canonically a little botched. His design actually kind of speaks for itself. I don't have much to say. There we go. EJ's done. Binary was super happy with how this turned out, and I have to say I like it a lot too. Toby was another one of Binary's favorites, meaning that, again, she mostly handled his design. It's mostly an adaptation of how he looked canonically, ripped open mouth and all. Like with EJ, I don't have a lot to say about him, he kind of speaks for himself. So you will just get to listen to the background music without my commentary. Now that wraps up Zalgo's canon proxies, but Binary and I did add a few more. Not all of them made it into the video, but these are the ones that did. To be quite honest with you, Hoodie seems like a logical choice for a faction opposing Slenderman, being a collection of the souls of those killed by him or his proxies. I feel like they'd hate that man from the get-go. Hoodie's design is supposed to almost resemble a simplified version of Maskey's: brown jacket and pants, hiking boots, and a black turtleneck. It's pretty close to what the old Marble Hornets series showed them looking like. They, of course, have their iconic mask as well, under which is absolutely nothing. Just scribbles and a void, which is loosely based on the drawings in the old Slender games and Marble Hornets. I have so little to say here that I genuinely can't think of anything else, so you get to just listen to background music like with Toby. there we go. That's Hoodie. Again, I haven't got much to say here, so let's just move on. This is Zalem, an OC that initially started off as a placeholder in an old draft of the script. She's supposed to be a demon, and design-wise is based on 3 specific things: crows, eyelash vipers, and black opals. What that ended up meaning was that while her skin, horns, tail, and clothing were very dark or dull in color, mostly shades of gray, blue, and black, her wings, hair, and eyes are really sparkly and colorful. Basically, her wings and hair have black as the base color with gradients of red, blue, and green, and both have sparkly filters I found on the asset store applied to them, and her eyes are bright orange. In short, she looks like a deviant art OC, and I love her. As for the rest of her design, she's supposed to be really tall and muscular, with broad shoulders since she has, wings. Her legs are sort of like what you'd see on a bird or some lizards, and her wings are supposed to have the kind of fluffy look that crow wings have. Her hair is fairly short and feathery, and she keeps it tied back a lot of the time. Her horns are based on an eyelash viper's head crest, and her tail is very snake-like with spines running down it. As for her clothing, it's basically intended purely for convenience. Halter top to accommodate her wings, and shorts and an overskirt to accommodate her tail, and all of it is fairly form-fitting and aerodynamic. I like to think she doesn't use a weapon per se. I honestly think she prefers hand-to-hand combat, but I do think she's capable of using magic innate to greet demons. I have a whole thing about demon classifications. It's very long and convoluted, but all you need to know right now is that demons are split into categories based on the orthodox interpretations of the deadly sins. And there's Zalem done. I'm unreasonably proud of how she turned out. I've wanted to make an OC based on black opals for ages. They're so pretty. Last but not least is Helen Highwater, from the creepypasta Charles Bonnet Syndrome by Mr. Stuff. Like a lot of the others, she's mostly a faithful adaptation of her original description. That said, I do want to talk about some of the decisions we made. Binary mostly adapted Helen's design 1-to-1, while I added a bit of a performer vibe afterwards. I'm fairly certain the only part of her design that didn't come directly from the original story was having really long dark hair, Sadako Yamamura style. I might have screwed up a bit on her face because now she kind of looks like those little monkey toys with the symbols. You know what, never mind, that actually makes her more unsettling. I'm not counting that as a mistake. When deciding on her color scheme, I ended up making the red have a sort of rosy, pinkish tone since I thought it would contrast nicely with the rest of her mostly being white or black. And Binary gave her shoes the sparkle that you'd have seen on the ruby slippers in the 1930s Wizard of Oz movie, since that's what her shoes were compared to in Charles Bonnet Syndrome. I'm not sure if that's what the author meant, but it's a cool visual, and it meant I got to play around with some of the filters in my drawing software. As for her weapon, she's yet another canonical knife wielder, but since I thought she gave off circus vibes, I gave her a throwing knife. I don't know, I thought it would be cool, and she does have that third arm, might make for some interesting battle tactics. And with that, we've finished off Zalgo's Proxies. This was a fun ride. Up next will be the SCP Foundation. There aren't going to be as many characters in that video, so hopefully it won't take as long. And hopefully by then, I will have my stills done. Until then, this is Hellspawn of Solomon's Key signing off.